Good afternoon, everybody. This is Steve Wilson from wateroperator.org. I work at the University of Illinois at the Illinois State Water Survey. Hopefully everyone can hear me, and I believe everything is good. It says on air, showing, and we're recording. So one thing, we are going to record this webinar, and we'll put it on our website and make it available. So if you know someone who wanted to attend and couldn't show today, it will be available. So today we're going to talk about a non-community class that we developed on groundwater and free resources that are available as a non-community water system through wateroperator.org. Wateroperator.org is a website that is kind of a clearinghouse of information. It hosts a lot of resources, and this non-community class is really geared towards groundwater users. Most non-community systems around the country are on groundwater, and so it's a very appropriate class for most non-community systems. Okay, so what is wateroperator.org? It's as I said, it's a clearinghouse of information. It's geared towards water and wastewater operators. So we list 11,000 training events annually, which is basically all of the CEU available classes and training classes in every state in the United States, and that's for water or wastewater operations. And so our goal is to provide all the types of training going on in your area. You can search by state or by type, and I'll show you examples of that later on. But if you need CEUs as an operator or a certification exam, all those sorts of things are listed here. In addition, it says 17,000 plus, but it's actually over 18,000 now resources that we link to, and these are all vetted by us and me and my staff. They're associations, state, WEA and AWA and Rural Water and RCAP and all the folks that do training around the country. Any of those groups, state agencies, federal agencies, tribal organizations that have information available for water and wastewater operators, we try to list it here. There are no companies. There's no, we're not selling anything. This is a program that's funded by RCAP, the Rural Community Assistance Partnership, and it's a partnership between us at the University of Illinois and RCAP, and with funding through US EPA geared towards small systems. And the idea behind this website is specifically to help small systems where an operator may have another job, may only work as a water operator 25% of the time, or may have several different roles in a community or with their organization, and it's to make it easy to find free information that's related to whatever topic you might be interested in. So it's unbiased. We include everybody. We're funded by RCAP and they're a TA provider, but we include all the other TA providers as well. Our goal is to do what's best for the operator, and we put out a newsletter, as it mentions here, twice a month. That's got a lot of useful information. I'll show you that near the end. And we put a lot of stuff up online that's just meant to help you understand your role as an operator and your responsibilities. So in bold here it says a free well care class. We have if you will, a sister not organization, but a .org that's for private well owners called the Private Well Class. It's privatewellclass.org, and we developed a 10-lesson class for private well owners that we used as the basis for developing this non-community class we're going to talk about today. And from my take on things, I'm a groundwater hydrologist, and I work at the Illinois State Water Survey, where we deal with well owners every day, and I'm in those sorts of issues. So a little bit about us. A lot of folks have never heard of the State Water Survey. We're the only one in the country. There's every state has a state geological survey. In Illinois also, just by the way things happened back in the 1890s, started a state water survey. It's a similar agency to our state geological survey. We're actually sister agencies under the same department at the U of I, University of Illinois. We started because of outbreaks of cholera and typhoid. So we started as a public health agency looking at trying to solve issues related to why these diseases were occurring. And, we this is the first systematic documentation of the quality of Illinois water. We now house the state's well logs. So when a driller drills a well, they file a log with the county send a copy to us, and we have over 500,000 groundwater logs, well logs. We also do pump tests for communities. We have a public service lab that until 2008 provided free water samples to any well owner in Illinois. And so we are the state's groundwater experts, if you will, and do a lot of applied research related to groundwater and water quality, surface water, atmospheric sciences, and chemistry. So just as an example, we're going through a lot of our historic records, trying to scan a lot of old paper, if you will. We have millions of sheets of paper related to communities especially. And this is a map from 1916 of Pana, Illinois, and it's a typhoid outbreak, which I don't know if you can see it on your screen or not, but right in the center there's a little red square that says Pana Ice Cream Company. In the end, that's where they tracked this particular typhoid outbreak to, was the ice cream vendor in town. So, you can't make this stuff up. And I've got a long history of trying to help solve these sorts of problems, as well as water quantity and quality issues around the state. So as far as continuing education credit for this, the class I'm going to show you, we are in the process of reaching out to the states to see about getting non-community credit, operator credit. We have not done that, so we don't have pre-approval, but if you need the agenda from today or a copy of the slides from today, we can send that to you. And one of my staff who is going to be on the call today isn't, and I don't think our handouts got loaded. Yeah, this says agendas in the file section under handouts, but it's not. But you can email us at info@wateroperator.org, and we can get that to you, both the agenda and like I said, a copy of the slides as a PDF. So as far as the free online course goes, that's on our webpage. It takes you through a website where you're doing the whole class online. And at the very end, and you have to complete all of it, and you also have to do the evaluation, it'll give you a certificate saying that you've completed the class. Yeah, and I'll walk through that here in a minute. So first though, this is the first time we've done a webinar for non-community systems, and we hold webinars every month for the private well class, where we talk about well basics, geology, water quality, how to sample, some of the things that a well owner needs to know. A lot of it's relevant to a non-community system. So I'm just going to do a short bit here on groundwater and wells 101, if you will, talking about geology and water movement and well types, just so that you have an understanding, if you own a well and it's for your non-community system, what you might have and what the issues could be, and why you really need to understand those things as a well owner and as a as a public water supply. So there really comes down to these issues. There's a lot of issues out there related to water quality, and they're in the news all the time. In the last 2 years, it's been PFO and PFOS and PFAs, but it was lead before that, and it's still an issue, and arsenic before that, and there's a lot of these issues that come up and make people more aware or more concerned. But it comes down to, it's either public health protection or source water protection and water quality in general. And those are the things that we need to be good stewards of as well owners, as those that serve water to customers or to residents and that sort of thing. So as I mentioned, there's a lot of issues that are in the news: the flooding last year, droughts, contamination events. Those are kind of teachable moments, and they make people more aware. We get a lot of calls from well owners who are concerned that their well might be contaminated because the community water supply that's 2 miles away issued a boil order in the paper because they had a main break. And that's the well owner not understanding that one doesn't affect the other, and those sorts of things. So even though these items in the news give me a chance to educate more people because they're more interested in their water quality, what it really comes down to for most private well and well issues in general is just poor well construction and lack of proper maintenance or understanding of how a well works and that sort of in those issues. So I show two poor examples here of dug and bored wells, which isn't as likely for a non-community water system, but there's a lot of these wells out there. And I just visited one yesterday, actually, out in the country near Champaign, where it's just they're not protective. Anything can get in the well, anything from the surface. And a lot of times, because wells are grandfathered in based on well construction code in most states, they may not meet those issues. So quickly, a little geology lesson. If you have a well, the reason you are able to pull water into the well and pump it out is because the geology is porous. So this is a block of sand, if you will, and you can see how there's space between all the sand grains. This could be a gravel, it could be a fine sand, but the porosity is a measure of the volume of pore space to the total volume for the material. So if I had a jar of sand in my hand and it's a uniform sand, the porosity of that would be about 30%, which means it's about 30% air and 70% actual sand grain. So in an aquifer, a sand and gravel aquifer in particular, if it's 100 feet thick and it's full of water, if you took all the sand away, you'd still have 30 feet of water left, which is a lot of water. That's why sand and gravel aquifers, if you're on one, are usually pretty prolific. Most irrigation occurs out of those sand and gravel aquifers, where they can pump thousands of gallons a minute. With bedrock aquifers, you can also have that amount of water, but it's a little more dicey, depending on most of the water is coming from fractures instead of in the grains themselves. The rock doesn't hold water per se very well. So, having the material below, the geology below, really dictates what kind of water you might have available to you. Here are some examples. The top three are all unconsolidated aquifer material. These would be in river valleys or in glaciated areas of the country where they're above bedrock. So it's called unconsolidated. It's not been consolidated like rock has. So there's pore space in between all the grains, and depending on how sorted that is and how much clay might be in there or silt mixed in with the sand, it dictates what kind of water supply you might have. But typically your porosity is in the 20 to 30% range. On the bottom three, we have fractured rock, fractured granite, and caverns and limestone, which is, those caverns and fissures have been dissolved by water moving through them over time. Granite can have as little as 1 or 2% porosity, and that's because granite is really hard rock. Water doesn't seep into it and can't be stored. It only exists in the fractures. The opposite side of that for rock would be sandstone, which is kind of a cemented sand, and sometimes, depending on the type of sandstone, it can have a secondary porosity in the rock itself. But in most cases, when you are dealing with a bedrock well, you're dealing with fractures, and it's based on the water and the size of the interconnectedness of the fractures, and the size of the fractures depend on how much water is actually being stored. So in southern Illinois, Indiana, and Kentucky, where you have a lot of caverns like Mammoth Cave and some of those places, depending on how high the water is in the ground, in the aquifer, you can have some pretty big areas with water availability if you hit those fractures. The other side of what dictates how much water you have available in your well is permeability. And that's it's not exactly a velocity, but it's sort of. So in a gravel, up in the upper left here, highly permeable. Water can flow right through it really easily. Water flows based on pressure. So if I poured water on a table and lifted one end of the table up, water would flow downhill. That's what happens in your well. The water is fairly flat all throughout an aquifer. You start pumping your well, you lower the water level in your well. Now all the water wants to run towards your well to be flat again. So how fast it moves depends on the difference in head between the static water level and the pumping water level. And it also depends on how easy it is for water to flow through that material, which is the permeability. So you can see here a gravel, 3,000 feet a day, down to a clay on the lower left where it may move 1 foot in 10,000 years. And that means it's a really tight clay where it's so the interspacing in the clay may be so small that water just it just takes a long time to try to get through it. So the porosity of that clay could still be 10 to 20% probably, maybe a little more, but it doesn't matter because the grains are so small that it's hard for an appreciable amount of water to get through it. So usually a clay or a silt is considered an aquitard or an aquiclude, which means they prevent water from moving through it, where sand and gravel on the unconsolidated side, on the left side here, is considered an aquifer. On the right side, those are all bedrocks: limestone, sandstone, shale, and just it mentions rock here, would be like granite. Limestone's considered fairly permeable. There are a lot of limestone aquifers around the country. The same with sandstone. It says as much as 3 feet a day, and that all depends on the number of fractures and the interconnectedness of those fractures. Again, it's almost like a piping system in most cases, where it's how interconnected all the pipes are, where water can come through, and it's again based on pressure. Shale is considered impermeable. It's a cemented silt and clay, basically cemented clay. I'm not a geologist, so I'll make that clear here. But water doesn't move through it very fast, and in a lot of cases, a shale layer will separate two aquifers, and they may have very different water levels because of that. If two aquifers are connected, they would likely have a very similar or the same water level because of the pressure, trying to be equal in both. But when you have a layer like a shale or a clay separating aquifers, it can cause significant head differences, and that's just a common occurrence where you have more than one aquifer at one location. And I guess on the extreme end here, they talk about 1 foot in 100,000 years. That's a very impermeable situation where it's not going to provide water for a well, and you're probably not going to get an appreciable amount of water there to be called an aquifer. This is just an example of if you had a tub or a large container with this type of material in it and you poured water on the top, here's how water would move through it. The upper left, the sand and gravel, it's kind of got a wetting front and it's moving through the soil. That's what we see with the water table and water moving through clay. It eventually makes its way down into a more permeable unit where it can move laterally, but it's kind of infiltrating through in between all the sand grains, versus all the bedrock. The other three are all bedrock examples where water is moving through the fractures. And the sandstone and dolomite example together, these are very much simplifications, but you can see how water can move through some sandstones, but it's usually not just a sandstone, but it's several different geologic units of different permeabilities, and so that dictates how the water might move through and get to a lower unit. There could be a shale in there that stops it all, and then it all runs horizontal from that point. And the other thing to note here is these all show bedrock as a flat layer, and rarely is bedrock flat. I mean, these units are angled. As an example, in the Chicago area, the deep sandstone aquifer that's used there for water supply is at between, 1,500 and 2,000 feet below land surface. That unit comes to the surface about 50 miles west of Chicago. And so it's at an angle so that the geology drops that same unit, angles down to 2,000 feet in 50 miles. So it's a lot more complicated than what we're showing here is the bottom line. The other part I want to talk about today is well type. Whether you have a dug or bored well, a driven sand and gravel aquifer well, or a drilled consolidated bedrock well, there's a mistake there, then it really matters. In some cases you might have choices. Other cases there's no aquifer per se, and so you're using a bored well that's using water from the water table. If you don't have a log, you need to try to find it and understand what type of well type you have, because it makes a difference on how you deal with your well. So unfortunately, a lot of older wells, just there aren't logs available, and that varies by state. Depending on when the state required those to be filed, it's very different around the country. So Dug or bored well, this is an example. You can see this rig is dumping a bunch of dirt from a 3-foot diameter cylinder. You can see the hole underneath the two men standing there, and they're basically drilling a large diameter hole. Then they'll put concrete tile vertically in that, and about every 4 feet they'll set another section of tile as a typical construction, and the water can seep in where those joints are. It's not cemented, and there's usually maybe a thin sand lens that's maybe a few inches thick, or not, and that's the reason you have a well that's such a large diameter is so that it can store water. I'm assuming you're familiar with cisterns, which you used to collect runoff from your roof. The same type of thing. You store it for when you need it. We have a well owner who contacted us from the western slope of the Rockies, whose well is in granite, and it only pumps a half a gallon a minute. So in his case, he pumps that well basically all the time at a half gallon a minute, and then pumps it into a cistern that he put in the ground there so that he can pump from the cistern to his house to have water supply, because that's the most amount of water he's going to get. So usually you put a dug and bored well in, a large diameter well, when you don't have an aquifer that's either there's not enough quantity of water or the water quality is poor. We have areas all around the country where there may be some kind of contaminant, or it may be salt water. I know in southern Illinois, when you get to a certain point, all of the shallow bedrock has a TDS of over 10,000, which is basically salt water, seawater, and so that's not really potable or able to use for drinking water supply. These are all examples of dug or bored wells. The one on the left is obviously an old hand dug well. We see these all the time, and if it's not properly sealed to the surface, snakes and anything smaller can get in these, and we found all of those things in wells before. I personally have seen frogs, a goat, you name it, in an old well that wasn't properly protected at the surface. These other two images, the one on the bottom and the one on the right, are also large diameter wells. Two types of construction. One has the concrete tile, the one on the right, going all the way up to the surface. So it's 3 or 4 foot diameter all the way up. And the other one uses a standpipe and basically the wide part of the large diameter part of the well, and that concrete lid start at 10 feet below land surface. And that's preferred today for construction, just because then you can add a more clay earth material or earth fill in the upper 10 feet. And that helps protect a little bit from surface contamination or surface infiltration into the well. Whereas the one on the right here, if that's a 4 foot section of tile and it's a foot above land surface, that means water can seep in at 3 feet below land surface. And that's pretty shallow, even if it's a tighter soil at the surface to let infiltration in. Much more likely to have something from the surface that gets in your well. Here are those two examples. The one on the left shows the tile going all the way up to the surface and with a concrete pad on top. And you can see here they put concrete 6 inches around the well down to at least 10 feet. And that's to, again, help protect it if it's properly constructed. And then the water level down in the well looks like it's even below that. You can see the little triangle. That means that's where the water is. So you have a submersible pump there. The one on the left, or on the right, I'm sorry, has the concrete pad down below 10 feet. Again, with some kind of clean earth fill there to try to help prevent water from infiltrating in too close to the surface. And in both cases, it's 3 foot diameter, excuse me, so that it can store water for when you need it. I grew up on a 14 foot deep hand dug well that my grandpa dug himself in 1933. In the summer, we would run out of water. If it rained really hard, our water would be muddy. It's not protective, and it certainly had surface influences, and it's just, it's a risk. It's a health risk. And, construction practices are important. Sand and gravel wells use a screen. So here's a picture of a screen. It's woven, usually stainless steel, sometimes PVC, and those slots are sized based on the size of the geologic sand material where you're going to put the well, finish the well. So, the size depends on the amount of water you need. A lot of folks who have a sand and gravel well may only have a 3 or 4 inch well because that provides plenty of water. Whereas in a bedrock aquifer, you may end up with a larger hole, trying to make sure you hit more fractures and things like that. And again, the idea is you have this screen so that the water can come in, but the sand won't. You also use a gravel pack, which is a sized sand that you purchase. So it's all uniform size that goes around the well screen. And that helps keep some of the fines from getting out into the well when you pump it. Here's a diagram of a typical well. And what's different between a sand and gravel well and a bedrock well is a sand and gravel well has a screen. And so the water's only coming in where the screen is. The rest of the well is a solid casing. So if you have a 200-foot well, typically the lower 10 feet or less, 4 to 6 feet typically, is a well screen. So that means water's coming in the well from 200 to 194 below land surface, let's say, or 190 to 200. So that means there's 200 feet of material that anything at the surface has to get through to get down to your well and get in your well. So they're very protective if they're deep like that, because it's completely solid casing all the way down to the screen, and you know where your water's coming from, how far away it's all it's all coming from near the well in that sand and gravel. On the other side of the fence, if you will, are bedrock wells, which typically, as shown on this diagram, they're only cased 10 to 20 feet into bedrock. So on this diagram where it shows overburden and saturated overburden, there are a lot of places in the country where bedrock's right at the surface or very near the surface. In that case, you may only have 20 feet of casing. So you could have a 200-foot bedrock well that only has 20 feet of casing. Now, most states require at least 50 feet now. That's not true everywhere. Some states have no well construction code still. But I've run into a lot of wells that are 600 feet deep and they have 12 feet or 15 or 20 feet of casing. And that's because if you look at these fractures that are going at an angle left and right here, the blue lines, the rock acts as the casing itself. It's not going to cave in typically. So you leave it open so that you can take advantage of any fractures you might run into. There are some really large fractures in northern Illinois and the Dolomite Aquifer up there, and they use those for irrigation. If you hit a fracture, you can pump 200,000 gallons a minute and sustain that. But if you miss the fractures, you might only get 10 or 20 gallons a minute. And so when you put in a 16-inch well or a 12-inch well to pump 1,500 gallons a minute, and it only pumps 10 or 20 gallons a minute, that's a lot of money spent for not having the water that you're really looking for. So the other issue is if you only hit 1 or 2 fractures, then water could be coming from further away, and it depends on which direction those fractures go. So in the case of a well that's 200 feet deep that only has 20 feet of casing, or say 30 feet of casing, if the fractures run back up towards the surface, you start pumping your well, you could be inducing flow from near the surface down into your well and from farther away because it's only running through those fractures and they don't have the volume of water that a sand and gravel well would have. So with a bedrock well, it's better to have a more of an understanding of the geology and what kind of fractures you have, and if anybody else has had a water sample, and just understand what your risks might be from that. So, okay, so a little bit about our class that we put online. This is it's called Groundwater and Well Care for Non-Community Public Water Systems. So it's based on our private well class program, and it's some of the information I just showed you is just one piece of it. There are 6 lessons, I believe, here, and the class itself for private well owners has 10, and you're more than welcome to do both. A lot of the materials the same or very similar. We've tried to streamline this and develop it more for non-community public water systems on the needs you have. Private well owners have different issues, especially when it comes to meeting the requirements under the Safe Drinking Water Act. You have sampling you have to do to meet compliance, where a public water supply or where a private well owner is basically on their own and trying to take care of the water system by themselves. And so there are some differences, and we've tried to streamline this to be really what's focused on important for non-community systems. So if you go to our resource library at the top of the wateroperator.org webpage and click on that, you'll see this list of different resources. And the middle one there, it says CEU class for non-community water supplies. If you click on that, it takes you to this web page called Thinkific. You'll have to register, and I didn't show the registration page, but it basically, there's 6 lessons here: the science of groundwater, groundwater and well contamination, well construction issues, which I just showed you a little bit, how water well system, and then best practices in emergency situations. So it walks you through either through text or video on understanding where your water's coming from, how your well works, what you need to do to make sure that it's safe as a drinking water supply. And you click next as you read through this, and at the end of each of the 6 lessons or 6 chapters, there's a short quiz that you have to take and pass in order to get the certificate that's available at the end. So some of it's video, some of it's, like I said, text, and it walks through how some of these things work. It talks about where your water's coming from. Like in this image, your groundwater could be depending on how deep your well is, and it could be in the ground for days, years, decades, or millennia. We have water. They use dating practices to determine how old water might be, and some of our deeper aquifers have water that's over 10,000 years old, based on some of the isotope ratios they have in it, which means it hasn't seen the light of day for that long. But the water cycle is a cycle. Eventually, water does come out of the ground, either discharges to a stream or to the ocean or wherever, evaporates and it rains and starts again. It may take it a long time, but it is a continual system. So at the end of each one, there's a quiz, and you have to answer a number of questions, and it tells you whether you get them right or not, explains what's going on with that. And again, it's just meant to educate you as a non-community system on issues related to your well. Once you've done that and we've gone through all 6 lessons, it'll tell you, what you're 100% through. Then there's evaluation to do at the end. And once you've done that, it also tells you like if you skipped anything. Some people may know enough about wells that they just want the credit for this, but you actually have to go through all the pieces. And that's the way we've set this up here. That's why up at the top here it says video transcript, how does a pressure tank work? I'd skipped that when I went through the class myself, and so it wouldn't give me my certificate until I did it. So then you can create a certificate. Here's the one that I did, and then you can use that. Like I said, we're working on, one of my staff is working on contacting the states to try to get CEUs for non-community operators for this class, and that's the idea. But regardless of the CEUs, it's really worthwhile to understand more about how your well works, and I certainly encourage you to do that. I wanted to mention one more time that a lot of this is based on material we provided to well owners from our private well class, and this is the front page of this website, and it's it says learn by video, learn by audio, and learn by email. There are 10 lessons that are sent to you once a week. It's all self-paced. There's no CEUs related to it or anything like that, but there's also podcasts and videos. And if you are a non-community water system who really wants to learn more about your well, we do a webinar every month through the private well class to talk about not only well issues, but sometimes septic issues. We do a lot of work with environmental health professionals, and we provide resources. And with those webinars, When you sign up, you're also able to ask questions in advance. And then myself and our lab director and my boss, who runs the groundwater section here, we try to answer as many of those questions and have slides available as part of the webinar to answer people's specific questions. So it's really worthwhile. If you have a question, you can also email us, and that's all I'm going to say about that. As far as the website, though, as an operator who I'm assuming needs to maintain their license and maybe is doing a non-community system or runs a non-community system on the side, they also community water operator as well, or if not, wateroperator.org has a wealth of resources available to you, and they're all free. Again, this is funded. This is a joint project between the University of Illinois and the State Water Survey and RCAP, the Rural Community Assistance Partnership. And with their funding through US EPA, we're able to put this together, and it's been around since 2009, and it's got a lot of useful information. That's about all I can say. So we've added a lot of additional value-added resources to this. So if it's a document or if it's a video or whatever it might be, we provide details of what's there. It's got a search feature that allows you to narrow down a search. Again, there's 18,000 documents that we link to, and so you certainly can't look through all 18,000, but if you know what you're looking for, there's a lot of ways to search that, and I'm going to walk through some examples with screenshots here to show you that. If I can get this to move forward. Okay, so here's the website, wateroperator.org. It's a very similar setup. You can search our calendar, you can browse our resources, and operators come to this website for two things most of the time: either to find a class that's in their area that they're interested in to take for CEUs, or to look through our resources to find something on a given topic. A good example would be, let's say that you feed chlorine, but you're having THM problems, and you might need to consider UV. You can come on here and search for UV and find resources from different states, different agencies, talks that somebody may have given, like at a Rural Water Association meeting or an AWA state conference, all that sort of stuff. And it's all, anything that's been put online that's been made publicly available, we link to it. So, so as an example, I'm going to go through the calendar first. If you click on event calendar at the top of the page, it brings you to this page, and it shows a calendar below here. And typically you're going to search for an event that's in your area. So I used Minnesota as an example. And if you click on Minnesota, state equals Minnesota, it gives you this list of events that are going on in May. Some of these organizations, I don't even know. The Minnesota Water Operators Association, Rural Water Association, MAP, the Midwest Assistance Program, which is RCAP affiliate. BIA is Bureau of Indian Affairs, so it's a tribal event for some of the tribal operators in Minnesota, plus some others. Groups like HAWK, if you have HAWK equipment, or other kinds of training, safety training. I know Texas Engineering and Extension Service does training in every state on emergency response, things like that. So we go out and find all this information from as many as 20 or 30 different sources for each state, and we put it on one calendar, so you as an operator can come here and see any kind of training that's going on. So if I click on this MAP on-site O&M training, for instance, I click on that and it brings up the details. It sends you back to MAP. It tells you what the class is about, if it's worth any CEUs, if there's a fee, who to contact, and then if you can click further on there to get to the events information itself. If you want to see, it's already May 29th. There's nothing on the calendar for this week, clearly. If you click on View List up there in the upper right, it'll take you to a list of all the training that we've put in our database that's in Minnesota. And it's a pretty big list. You can see the bar over here on the right side. I'm about halfway down, and it shows a bunch of events from May 17th down to June 20th. There's more below that. But you can see the different organizations. And again, if you click on any one of those, it'll take you back to details that will get you to the registration page for those classes. Some are free, some certainly aren't. I know the TPC Trainco events are pretty expensive, for instance, but they're really helpful to a lot of operators. So, we list anything that's worth CEUs or that's free. That's typically our litmus test for what we include on our website. So if you want to look just as an organization, you can see I clicked on a second search feature, sponsor, Equal Midwest Assistance Program. You can see some of the other organizations that are listed there that also have training in Minnesota. And there's only 2 events shown, and they're on the 17th. But if I click on View List, it shows you what's coming up for MAP through the 9th in Minnesota. And one of those is a well owner seminar. So we work with RCAP directly and their regional affiliates, which MAP is one of, on the private well program that we manage. And they are putting on workshops for well owners all over the country. And there's one on the 9th of June in Minnesota. And as a non-community operator with a well, these workshops would be pretty valuable to you if you're not an expert on geology and wells. Jesse Campbell's the person who does the work there. He's a really knowledgeable guy, easy to talk to, and so these things are going on all over the country. And if you click on that, it gives you those details, tells you where it's at. It's in Perham, Minnesota. It's not worth CEU credit for any operator, but it's, again, certainly worthwhile to take the class and learn more about your well. If you click on the link to MAP, you can go to their main page, and I scroll down part way, and you can see that well owner seminar listed there, and it says, for information, contact Jesse, click here, and every one of our pages has a link like that. We don't host training. We actually don't do training ourselves except a webinar like this. Our job is to make sure that you know what training might be available for you in your area, and make sure that you can find it's relevant. And I don't think I included it in this, but you can also search by category. So, and I'll show you categories more when we get to the document side, but you can narrow it down. The problem is, it may be in another state, so usually you're going to look in where you live first. So, but the other thing I do want to mention, because it's growing, it's getting bigger and bigger, like the webinar we're doing today, is that one of the types you can search on is webinar. And obviously these are all over the country. 2 of the bigger organizations that do webinars are the Illinois Section AWWA, which I'm a member of, and RCAC, which is the Western RCAP based in California, and they service the 15 westernmost states. But they do a lot of, because there's so much ground to cover, they do a lot of webinars. You can actually sign up for a lot of these. You can see on the 29th, it says WOO Free Resources for Non-Community Public Water Systems. That's our acronym for wateroperator.org. That's this webinar. But a lot of different groups are doing these sorts of webinars. Many of them are free, and you can do them from your computer no matter where you are. And so I know I was at a meeting last week with someone from RCAC, and they said they've even had folks like from the Philippines on their webinars, and that's probably because they found them on our website. So to narrow this down, again, there's a lot of webinars. You could also search by topic. So if I say groundwater, it narrows it down to these 2. RCAC had one on the 17th on what you need to know about the new Groundwater Management Act. If I want to see everything that we list as a webinar related to groundwater, you click on View List, and it shows you some things coming up, and they're all the 2 we're hosting, which is today and then next week, and then several from RCAC, which does a lot of work related to groundwater and wells, especially in California, where they've had, the last few years of drought have caused a lot of issues with groundwater there. That's all I'm going to talk about on the event side. On the if you click on Resource Library again and go to Document Search, it's a very similar type of setup. So you see this page. Most of the time, if you're looking for a document, whether that be a video or a manual or a handbook or a flyer or something to help you understand a given topic, you're going to search by category. So you can search by category, type, state, or host. And I'm going to talk about category in a minute because there's 32 of those. But Some examples of the type are fact sheets, forms, manuals, videos. There's 5 or 6 others. So you can search through that list and see what type of document there might be. You can search by state. We also list some things that are nationally recognized, like sometimes US EPA puts on a webinar that's nationally recognized, and so all the states will accept it. And we also host a lot of tribal documents that are specifically for tribal operators. And you can search by host. If you know somebody says that, hey, MAP has this great class coming up on the 9th, you can, or has these great resources that go along with their class I just took or whatever, you can go and look for host and find Midwest Assistance Program, and you can see anything they might have listed. And so it's really helpful. And again, I'm going to show you some examples here. As far as categories, there are 32 categories. There's 6, I believe, that are wastewater specific. There's about 8 or 10 that are water specific, and all the rest are really for anyone. So safety is another one, or certification and exam prep is another one. Then I'll show you how you can use the keyword search to narrow that down from there. But there's a lot of different types of categories to help you find what you're looking for. So when you're at this front page under Resource Library for document search, you can select, for instance, I selected arsenic and then clicked on Retrieve Documents, and there's 187 documents that we link to related to arsenic. Those could be a handbook that has 12 chapters, and one of the chapters on arsenic, or it could be a brochure that some state agencies put out on arsenic, or a fact sheet. You can see here, this is the first one here. For each document listed in here, all 18,000 of them, we've went in and created a summary and listed the source page and the organization that hosts it. We don't host all these. These are not our documents. They're from these 800 plus organizations that is to help you find things. I guess a good example would be that some states have more dollars and resources available for supporting their operators than other states do. Minnesota's example on the positive side, their citizens passed a law a number of years ago putting a tax on things to provide money to their Department of Health to create a lot of resources for both operators and the public. And so they have a ton of videos and documents and things that are available to operators in Minnesota, where another state that maybe is struggling financially doesn't have the resources through their state primacy agency to develop a lot of those resources. If I'm in one of those states, where am I going to find information? If I'm in Illinois and there's not information available from my state EPA, for instance, I'm not going to go search the other 49 states to try to find it. Seems like that would be a lot of time wasted trying to find a certain thing. But we leverage all 49 states' information here. So if you just come in and search for arsenic, and you can narrow this down further from 187, you can find resources from different vetted groups that are, we've vetted all this so that you're not going to get what you get in a Google search, for instance, where you may have a bunch of advertisements and things like that. None of that is here. It's just the material that you're interested in. So I went down 2 or 3 pages and found this document, Arsenic Removal and Disposal for Public Water Systems, and it's from the New Hampshire Department of Environmental Services. If I click on that, it comes up with this fact sheet. And this is just one example. You can narrow it down by state if you want, but a lot of times you really don't want to do that, because you'll get more resources that might be relevant that maybe another state has or another organization has that's in a different state. If I look for host, New Hampshire Department of Environmental Services, they have 267 different types of documents on their webpage, and you can see some of these are on different chemicals in drinking water. They're fact sheets. One's a field guide for pumping test operators, which would be relevant. And so there's just a lot of different information. We've linked to it all and made it available. So some organizations like US EPA, 1,641 documents. I don't know how many of you have tried to go to the EPA's webpage and find things, but sometimes some things they've It's certainly improved over the last couple of years, but some things are hard to find, and some parts of their web page are still not updated. And so unless you know the actual URL or the link, you can't even get to some of those documents. We update this regularly, and by doing that, we check to see that the URLs work. And so from that, you can see that there's a lot of documents available from EPA. But that's, you're not going to search through 1,600 documents. And so if I narrow that down and say non-community systems, which is also one of our categories, you can see these are documents that the EPA has that are specifically for non-community systems. Final guidelines for certification for community non-transient, non-community public water systems, fact sheet on the groundwater rule. Some of the things that you as a non-community system have to deal with today, where 15 years ago, before the groundwater rule, there wasn't a lot of compliance testing for non-community systems, and now there's several of the actual Safe Drinking Water Act regs applied specifically to you. So it's a good way to keep up and understand what's going on. You can also use a keyword filter and search for something that's unique that wouldn't be in one of our categories. So RTCR, the Revised Total Coliform Rule, you can search and then narrow that down using the select button from the 66. And it talks about these are from different groups. You can see here Connecticut, Florida, Tennessee. They're all government agencies in this case, but there's probably some of the TA providers, some of the rural water associations or AWA sections also have some of these resources available. So if I say fact sheets and case studies, I'm just trying to understand it. You can see the Water Research Foundation has something, and several of the states do again, and how to understand what RTCR is and how it might affect you. So the state of Iowa decided to create some videos about RTCR to help their operators. These are great, and it explains what the Revised Total Coliform Rule is. If you're also a community operator, some of the assessment procedures. And it's one thing we've learned from doing this work and from our private well class work is a lot of people prefer to watch a video than to read. I'm old-fashioned. I think that's sort of sad in some ways, but it is the way things are going. And so there's a lot more and more videos available on different topics. And so we've tried to include those and make those available as well. You can search by organization. So RCAP, the Rural Community Assistance Partnership, is the umbrella nonprofit national organization, if you will, that the 6 regional RCAP affiliates sit under. They put out a lot of materials that are useful to operators and on not just O&M or what to do in an emergency situation or some of those things, but also on how to get a project financed and some of those things, and how to work with your customers and all those sorts of issues as well. One of the things that they've done a lot of work in over the last 5 years or so is energy efficiency. And so when I put in energy in the keyword filter, narrows it down to 7 documents that they may have. A Drop of Knowledge is their newsletter. This energy audits, the second one here, was a talk given at, I believe that was given at an ASDWA conference. So yeah, that's why it says host, Association of State Drinking Water Administrators. I clicked on the one that says 5 things you can do to save energy at your utility, and it takes you to a web page. Scott Straley was with RCAP in Ohio and did a lot of work looking at energy efficiency and how to make the systems more sustainable. And he created this web page on energy use and things you can do. Simple things sometimes, like your pump may be 30 years old and very inefficient, and it may pay for itself in a couple of years if you were to get a new pump to replace the one you've already got. So I mentioned videos. If you just search for videos, there's 528 currently, and that number grows, I swear, almost every day. More and more videos are becoming available. People put things out. So on a lot of different topics. So when you just say videos, it's going to give you the entire gamut, all 32 types of categories. And so that's a lot to look through. If I say consumer information, you get 21 videos on how to communicate the value of water, things like that. Yeah. Non-community systems, there's 4 videos here on that. Again, you can pick your topic if you're interested in disinfection and disinfection byproducts. Yeah, you can find all that here. Operation and maintenance. There's 126 videos that we link to that are all about operations and maintenance. I apologize. I thought I had my phone shut off. All right. So if you look through that list, one of them was how to repair a water main break, and I realize most non-community systems don't have to worry about water main breaks. It's just an example, and because it piqued my interest. I think most water operators would laugh at the idea of saying that a water main break is easy in any way. And so you can see the range of videos that are listed here: hydrant inspection, fundamentals of fats, oils, and grease abatement. So it's a lot of different things. But when you click on that, it takes you right to the YouTube page. And as it turns out, the Village of Downers Grove put this up. The reason they called it How to Repair a Water Main Break in 8 Easy Steps is because they put this online for their staff. It's a fairly large suburb in the Chicago area. And so this was a way to get their staff started and help them understand what they're going to have to do whenever there's a water main break. And I imagine they repair a lot of them. So, but it's beneficial. They put it on YouTube. Now it's available to everybody, and that's pretty cool. So we do have a blog, which is kind of like a newspaper article or a journal article, if you will. And we try to feature videos a lot on that and talk about issues like trying to educate the public on will it flush. This is a great video that someone put together on things that you shouldn't put down a toilet, because people put things down there all the time that end up clogging septic systems, or they're hard for the wastewater plant to deal with. And things that they talk about, flushable kitty litter, for example. It's not flushable. You should never flush it. It's really not true. So just a lot of good information on our blog, and you can see a lot of different topics here on the right that we've provided information on in our blogs. Public communication. Depending on the type of non-community system you are, this isn't as important necessarily, but it's good for people to know, depending on the type of business you have. If they're drinking a lot of water that you're providing, there's a list of resources on this communication page that are required by law. And then down near the bottom, we put a lot of information together from some of the resources we've uncovered on best practices and for voluntary communication. If people understand the level of work you have to go to provide safe water to them, it would help them understand what the real value of water is and why they shouldn't take it for granted and some of those things. So, just like we post all the time, we use Facebook and Twitter and LinkedIn. They're really a great way to get a message out, and more than just, and especially if it's a business, you're a business, most of the time you have at least one of those type of accounts to promote yourself. And it's a good way to, once you've done your sampling, your quarterly sampling or whatever, and everything came back fine, it's a good way to, okay. And I skipped one. Under email updates at the top, where it says email updates across the top of the web page, you can click on that and you come to this page and it takes you to our newsletter page. You can sign up, it's free, first name, last name, and email address. And there's 3 different newsletters we put out. The wateroperator.org newsletter comes out twice a month. And these other 2, technology news, is more geared towards advances in drinking water technology. We're involved with a program related to that. And we also try to serve the tribal community, the 580 or so tribal utilities out there, and information specific to tribes and some of the issues they may have. So if you scroll down this page, you can see all the past issues. Obviously, I haven't updated this page. We're up in the 200s now. But you click on any one of these and you can see our newsletter. It's very timely. This is over a year old, but It's just because I didn't provide a newer one, but our newsletter is current events. We put stuff recently about PFOA and PFOS and different things that are going on. Talk about some of the videos we provided on our blog and other information. And my staff, my younger staff, who are all into texting and all that stuff, have created this. You can text tap water to 444-999 and sign up for our newsletter that way, or you can go on our webpage and sign up that way as well. Okay, so this is the very bottom of our front page, and I just wanted to show this because it has our phone number and our email address and all the different social media sources that we have. And there's a little video here on how to find documents on wateroperator.org that walks through more examples. It's free, it's easy to use. It's meant to be a service. If you are looking for information and you can't find it, call us or email us and say, hey, I'm trying to find this, or I'm on a slow connection. I tried to download this document and it keeps crashing. We've created PDFs and mailed them to folks, or even in a few cases, we have even printed them out in color and mailed them out to people. So, we're funded to do those things and to support you as an operator. And so use us. And that's the bottom line. So I think that's all I have. And I'm going to look at the questions. I haven't done that. Haijuki's been on the whole time here, and I don't know. I don't see any questions. If anyone has any questions, okay, we have chat. Okay. Yeah, I'd be glad to answer them. So the other thing, we got a little time. I could pull up the website and just show an example or two of what, how our site works. And I think I'll do that real quick. So this is the web page. And Haijuki, can you hear me?
Yep, I can hear you.
I didn't see any questions. Is that correct?
Yes, I haven't gotten any questions.
Okay. Well, so here's our website. Again, search the calendar. I'm just going to go through a couple examples and I'll let everybody go. If I say search by state and pick, let's say, Idaho, and you can see everything that's going on. I mentioned before, one of the advantages of this is that we link to all the classes going on in your state. A lot of operators are either used to going to a rural water meeting or a WEA meeting or an AWA meeting annually and getting a lot of their CEUs, but there's a lot of useful information. HAWC trains all around the country on the equipment they provide. So if you're happen to have HAWC equipment, you can find this information. You can search just on HAWC and you can see, those things that are available. It's pretty useful. If you really want to search by category, you can see, anything going on related to disinfection and disinfection byproducts. You can see, obviously, there's a lot there, so I'd want to narrow that down. Let's pick a state like California that's probably going to have more things. And click on View List. You can see all the things going on there related to disinfection and disinfection byproducts in the state of California that quickly. And here's leak detection principles from California Rural Water. There's probably a number of things. If I go back to the View List, So it's really handy to use and simple. If I go to the resource library and look at the document search, I mentioned UV before. If I say type equal disinfection byproducts, category is disinfection byproducts, you get 891 resources, which is a lot. But if I say UV, now it's down to 57. If I say fact sheets, because I just want to know a little bit about it, I'm trying to learn, now there's 9. And let's see. We can pick one here. ultraviolet disinfection. It brings up this tech brief from the National Environmental Drinking Water Clearinghouse. Of course, we have a mower to close the day here, but it gives you information. Again, it's really handy. So I encourage you to use it. If you have any questions, you can contact us. You can email me directly or call me directly too. And yeah, there's a lot of good stuff. So with that, I think I'm going to end the webinar. And I appreciate everyone's time today. And if you have any questions as a follow-up, please let me know. So thank you.